Hey, what's up? I'm Aaron LaCrate from the Certifiably Milkcrate show, where I'm going to be sharing with you some of the untold stories from the crate, from my life's work in fashion, music, and DJing. Sit back, relax, and let's go digging in the crates. In this episode, I'm super excited to sit down with Jerry Ade, my first boss in the music business when I first moved to New York City in 1997. Now, Jerry Ade is a legendary super agent who's the first person to ever book hip-hop. When I worked for Jerry, I was Eminem's first booking agent. I was Destiny's Child's first booking agent. I was booking Jay-Z for $10,000 a night, Company Flow at $500 a night, Noreaga at $2,000 a night, Missy Elliott for $4,000 a night. That's unheard of. But that just goes to show you what we were doing when. Jerry and I worked on the Hard Knock Life tour, where Jay-Z, Method Man, Redman all toured America and grossly sold some of the largest selling hip-hop shows of all time. Very excited to share with you Jerry's story, behind the scenes information on the agency business, and what I was doing in 1997 in the early days of Milkcrate. I hope you enjoy it.
Certifiably Milkcrate, 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 Milkcrate. Certifiably Milkcrate, 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 Milkcrate. Certifiably Milkcrate, Milkcrate, Milkcrate. Show. Certifiably Milkcrate, Milkcrate, Milkcrate. Show.
The legendary super boss, super agent, Jerry Ade. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Nice to be here.
It's awesome to be here. So a lot of people don't know anything about the agency business, Famous Artist Agency. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go backwards into how you got started?
Well, Famous Artist Agency was an outgrowth of General Talent International, which was an outgrowth of Norby Walters Associates. And we started many years ago, 1970, in the bar band business. And that's how the culmination came to Famous Artist.
And what would you be booking when you very first started? What sort of acts?
Well, we booked lounge bands in 6 nights a week in bars for adult clients in the 70s. And I started in 71. It was lounge acts in Jersey, New York City, in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan. And we'd have about 50 bands working at any given time. And how we got into the mainstream R&B music business was one of our clients was a group called Gigi in City Life. And Gigi happened to be Gloria Gaynor. And she had this big hit record at the time. It wasn't a big hit. The first one was called Honeybee. And then finally, after the third release, she hit with I Will Survive. And that changed all of our lives.
Was this pre-disco when Gloria started with Honeybee?
Oh, yes. Disco started in the 70s, and Honeybee was one of the first ones. We also had another girl named Carol Douglas that was the lead singer of one of the bands that played in these bars. And she hit with Doctor's Orders, which was also a very first disco record, an early disco record.
What was it like finding a Gloria Gaynor? How did you discover her?
Well, we didn't discover Gloria. We had bands, and different bars required different bands. Some were, I call them Italian hitter bars. Some of them were rock bars. Some of them were just Holiday Inn lounges with the traveling salesmen. So you had different bands for different things. Gloria happened to be in this band, and she had a manager named Jay Ellis, who was a character from the 8th Avenue, and he produced a record with Tony Bon Jovi and I can't remember the writer's name. It was Bon Jovi and another fella wrote the song and produced the song. He brought it to Polygram, and he made a deal. And she still worked in the bar business for a couple of years before these records broke. She wasn't a big attraction. She was small. But that brought us into the disco business in the early days.
And the nightclub lounge business, what was different about that time of New York? Can you just kind of create a bit of a visual? Because it's hard to imagine, I think for anyone watching this today, there being that much live music at one time and that much variety in live music, and I'm guessing that much original live music. These weren't cover bands, these were original acts.
No, they were cover bands. They did shows. They were called show groups. And we played the Drake Hotel, and we played a number of different bars. And at the time, 20 to 50-year-old people would take their dates to dinner and see a show. And these weren't the name attractions, but they were like a name attraction. They would do a complete show. And you would ask me, Andre Sorrell were one of our big bands, and Vincent and Pesci were one of our bands. And we booked them on occasion. They didn't need us because they stayed with all the Jersey Italians, and they kept them very busy. But those were all part of our early days. But the scene was people took their dates and their wives to dinner, and their girlfriends when their wives were home on the Tuesday, Monday, to see shows and go dance.
And Vincent Pesci, would that happen to be Joe Pesci?
That was Joe Pesci.
So he was a singer before he was an actor?
No, he was a comedian, and Bobby Vincent was the singer.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
And what was that show like? I mean...
It was, they did a lot of Frank Sinatra and Louis Prima and things of that nature.
Gotcha.
And they did like a Martin and Lewis. Steve Martin, Jerry Lewis.
Gotcha.
Jokes and comedy.
So on any given night, you could go to any of these shows that you wanted to. You could pop in and see a Joe Pesci show.
But he wasn't a big name then.
But if you wanted to, let's say it was something that you enjoyed. You enjoyed that show. You could just go around and see a ton of different shows in that.
Yeah, and we had a fella named Lou Caddy and the Panics, like a Vincent and Pesci, like a Andre Sorrell. They were all great shows, and they played all over Jersey, and we booked them in Vegas. We booked them all over the place.
And then how did you evolve into what would be the next phase of your booking as the Gloria Gaynor hits? So disco starts.
It's interesting. As Gloria Gaynor hit, the bar band business started to shrink because it was Gloria Gaynor and it was Carol Douglas, and then there was Donna Summer, and there were many, many early disco hits, Silver Convention, and all kinds of bands from that era. And as the discos started to form, the places where bands played, bars, they fell apart. They put up disco balls and became hired DJs like you and didn't have to pay a band anymore. And the whole business changed. And as we saw the band business shrinking, we started to go after and chase young black artists. We didn't call it disco at that time because it was disco, but they played to black audiences and white audiences. And we'll talk about radio and retail in a little bit, but it was a lot different in the 60s and early 70s.
When that transition happened between the bar business and the DJ disco scene, was it a tough time in the agency business? Was it a scary time, or was it were you ahead of the game, ahead of the curve?
Any time in business is scary, Aaron. You're in business.
Yeah.
It's always frightening. We didn't know what was happening. Nobody knew what was happening. But what was happening was when we first got into business, or when anybody was in the music business, there was pop radio, and then there was black AM radio, which played basically all R&B and black and gospel music, and then there was pop radio. And pop radio would play anybody. I think one of the big things about Motown was that they had a lot of artists that were very popular with white audiences, and they played on the AM pop stations because FM didn't really exist at that point. And Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind and Fire, and many of the early all of Motown, the Supremes, the Temptations, the Four Tops, all made pop radio, which was AM radio. But at that time, FM started to come in. And prior to that, radio wasn't as segregated as it was. So certainly there were the black stations and there were the white country stations, and there was the pop stations, but pop played anything that the audience liked. And of course, everybody loved black music, and everybody still loves black music. So there was no interference about who black or white in those days, in the early days. But FM started to play, and they started to find they needed to find artists, the DJs, because in order to get a license, you had to broadcast 24 hours a day. And there wasn't progressive music. I call it progressive at that time, Crosby, Stills and Nash and The Who and the English Invasion, Bowie and all those people, they didn't exist then. So the DJs would get an album of somebody with Creedence Clearwater, let's say, and they play the whole album without an commercial or interference because There was nobody advertising. And they were poor, and the radio stations, everybody was struggling to make it happen. Well, they started to build artists. And what happened was, they didn't play the black artists like the pop stations. On occasion they would, but they wouldn't. And the black DJs figured, we're going to get stations too, and they got stations, and they just started playing black music. And what ended up happening was that radio got very segregated. You had white stations, and then you had black FM stations. You still had pop, and sometimes the black artists would be played on a black station, they'd be played on the pop station. They had two formats. And if they were really great, like Aretha, they get played on the progressive station. But that ended up petering out, and you had progressive FM, which brought us groups like Brass Construction, Kool and the Gang, Gap Band, Cameo, Barcase, Frankie Beverly, Confunction. And we ended up leaning in that direction because the disco bands, basically the disco music, they weren't bands, the artists were a lot of black. I mean, we had Ecstasy, Passion, and Pain. The Tramps were big. Gloria was big. We had Silver Convention, and that's what happened.
And how did that, so the lounge scene, it's people sitting at tables like Goodfellas, kind of dressed in ties.
Exactly.
Very dressy, and, you know, sitting there listening with their drink and their date, and then that fizzles into disco. And what's the disco landscape look like? You're hanging out. Did your style change? Did you start wearing, does the whole wardrobe change now?
My wardrobe was consistent for 60 years. Okay, I wore a tie and jacket no matter what.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, you recall that, I think. Yeah, I always wore a tie and jacket, so no, I didn't.
But but you're in the scene. You could walk into any room, backstage of any place, the hottest places, the hottest artists. How did you say to yourself, gee, this is getting different. This is looking different.
Oh, well, Studio 54 definitely looked different.
Right.
But we had Grace Jones. I had Grace Jones at that time, and we had Gloria, and we had Silver Convention. They were all playing those kind of places. They played Studio 54, and there was no place like Studio 54, but they played clubs of that nature, or whatever. It was kind of to copy that style all over America. New York, Chicago, Boston, LA.
So Grace Jones wants to be booked at Studio 54.
No problem.
They have to go through you.
Yes.
Every time.
Yes.
Did they ever try to go around you?
Not really.
No?
No, you know, you remember, maybe you don't, when you signed a client, they were yours, and you represented them.
Yeah.
And there's always guys that want to go around you. They want to steal the act. They want to book it, but it wasn't
like it that era.
If you represented an artist, and the club owners and the promoters knew that, they respected that. It was any kind of business.
And Studio 54 didn't want a freebie. They weren't so hot. They expected Grace Jones to perform for nothing, or
No, nobody performs for nothing. Aaron, you were an agent.
I know, but
could you get Jay-Z to perform for nothing?
No,
not happening.
No,
nobody performs for nothing. No money. We don't work for free.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody got paid, and it was a respectful business. And for the most part, it was like that my entire career.
So let's go way back. We're going to stop at disco before we get into. Let's go to the early days of Jerry 8. Born, neighborhood, first job, whatever you want to share about how you came up into the first, whatever, however you want to share into how you got into the agency business, whether it was another musical business before that. So, Jerry, in the early days of you, what neighborhood were you born in New York City? What was the neighborhood like, and where did you get your classic New York City attitude and work ethic from?
Well, I grew up in Peter Cooper, which was a working class. It's not a project, it became condos, but it was firemen, school teachers, police officers, and regular working class families in New York City. And you grew up at a playground, and you had a fist fight every day. It was just normal kids playing, but I didn't know what real fighting was until I went to camp when I was like 10 years old. I went to YMCA camp, and somebody tackled me, and we had a fight, and I didn't understand getting tackled to the ground because we lived where there was pavement, and you fought like this. So the guy, he won that fight. Anyhow, it was just a regular neighborhood in New York. It didn't seem tough at the time. My nose was crooked because it was been broken 3 times, but it was a normal place. And it was a family neighborhood, and I think it was fine. And I got into music I can remember listening to Murray the K on AM radio and speaking Miyazuri, the is a Kiyaze language when I woke up the next morning. And I liked music as a young kid, and when I was in about 6th or 7th grade, I played the piano. My mother had me take piano lessons, and I started a little band in grade school. And by the time I got to high school, I was trying to book the band at the local Chinese restaurant, and we got jobs. And I'm 14 and 15 years old, and we're playing little places around the neighborhood. And I end up going to college, and I go with a friend of mine that plays guitar. He went to the Berklee School of Music, and I went to Emerson in Boston. And at the time, there was a place called the Combat Zone, which were all the sailors and all the military were based in that area, and there was probably 50 nightclubs on Washington Street, and all the hookers and all the drug dealers and all the normal girls that wanted to meet a guy, all the military was there. They're guys in their uniforms, and every night, they called it the Combat Zone, there was a fight. Somebody would end up in a brawl on the street. So I got into a band there in college, and I worked 6 nights a week in the band, and it was 6 shows, 6 sets a night. It was just dance band, cover band. And you played there, and I was making $150 a week in 1968, which was a lot of money in college in those days. It could pay for my rent and my apartment and the car and everything I needed. And I got through school like that. And then I had a band, a friend who was in a band, and he worked, I didn't work Monday nights. I worked Tuesday through Sunday. He worked Monday through Saturday. He was in a Catholic bar, so I go to visit him on Mondays on my night off. And the owner comes up to me and says, I know you know the guy in the band, but they haven't been rehearsing. I need a new band. Do you know anyone? And it just so happens, of course, I knew everybody. I said, sure, I know a band. And he said, well, send them down to audition. Can they play this club? I said, oh, they're perfect for you. So I went to my friend who had the band. I said, would you want to go audition? But if you get the job, you have to pay me 10%, which is what I was paying for agents and to the Boston guys. And he said, yeah, you give me the job, you got it. So he goes down and auditions. He gets the job. And about 3 weeks later, in those days, you didn't book one-nighters. You booked somebody for 2 months, 3 months. And if they were really good, they stayed there for life. So he's paying me 10%. My buddy knocks on my door and says, you got me fired, you son of a gun. He didn't say that. He said, you got me fired. My mother's going to kill me. How am I going to pay my rent? Because he was in school also. And I felt terrible. But I said, you didn't rehearse. What do you... So I went out on my Monday night off, and I started looking for a job for him. I knew what kind of club his band could play in, and I found him a job. He had to go audition. He got it. I said, but you have to pay me 10%. He said, no problem. Those days, I was making $150 a week, and the band was getting paid $600 a week. So I had 2 bands working for $600 a week. I was $120. It wasn't $150, but it beat the shit out of working 6 nights a week. I quit my band job immediately, and that's how I started being an agent.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up booking lots of bands in Boston. I had about 5 or 6 little groups. And when I graduated school, I came home to New York and started doing the same thing.
And just how did you pick up in New York? Just knew a lot of people?
No, I started going to every bar that had a band. I look at the bar, look at the band, and my criteria is you had to work 5 nights a week. I didn't want to book one nights because I wanted to get paid. So I went and talked to every bar owner. I'm 21 years old. I probably looked 14 as you did when I hired you.
Yep.
I looked 14. But they all listened to me, and I said, if I have my band's audition, if you like them, will you hire them? He said, well, if they can do it, sure. And I ended up getting one band, and then another, and then another, and I ended up having about 20 bands. And I got into business, and I was bumping heads with a fellow named Norby Walters all the time, and we ended up teaming up.
What was Norby booking at the time?
He was booking the same kind of bands.
Same kind of thing.
He had owned a very prominent nightclub in New York City next to the Copacabana called Norby Walters. But his name was Norby and his brother's name was Walter. But the and sign, the ampersand, didn't light up. So he became Norby Walters.
Wow.
But he lost his license and he started booking bands because he knew every band around because they worked for him for years in that business next to the Copa.
And what was the night out like that? I mean, were we in the, is this in the, going back to the lounge era?
No, that's the lounge era, yeah. We're in the 70s now, early 70s.
And this is still people going out. 70s, this pre-disco, right?
Pre-disco.
We're talking Joe Pesci type clubs and whatever else was happening at the time.
Yes.
And you and Norby, when you bumping heads, was it actually was it friendly competition, or was it ever more like, was there ever
No,
a time?
nothing's friendly in competition in business.
Yeah. So what was it like? What was the beef with Norby Walters like when you're a kid and your first foray into booking?
He didn't view me as a competitor.
Okay.
I'm just a pain in the ass. I had a few bands working.
Right.
But when we teamed up, we worked out great. And we spent the next 20 years together.
Yeah.
And we went out of the bar band business and we went into the disco business, which brought us to the R&B business.
How much older was he at the time?
20 years older.
20 years older than you?
Yeah.
Wow. So very well connected in New York and
Yeah, he knew all the bars, and we weren't in the record business at that time.
Right.
It wasn't until we went into the R&B business that we became in radio and retail, and all those things made it a lot.
And was Norby going out, or were you the young guy that he relied upon to run the show? He was just kind of sitting back at that point.
No, he never sat back. No, he worked very hard. We all worked very hard. It was an incredibly difficult business because we felt a responsibility to the band. You had to keep them busy. You remember, you're dealing with guys who made a living at this in those days. Guys could make $300 and $400 and $500 a week in the early '70s if they had a great band, and they were an attraction of sorts because you didn't have name acts playing in nightclubs in those days, except for the Copa and a few big lounges like that. And it was very hard. And you always had to find new clubs and new places were coming and going, people in and out of business. But we ended up having about 20 of us working. We had about 10 agents and the support staff.
Where were you located? What was the first office?
We started in Jericho, Long Island with the bars bands, but then when we got into the disco business, we moved to 1290 Avenue of the Americas, which was 51st and 6th. And we had a small office on the second floor, and then our next office was 1650 Broadway, which is a famous music building, like the Brill Building. It's where Donnie Kirshner was, and there was a recording studio in the basement, and all kinds of writers and producers and singers had offices there, and it was you could walk down any hall and hear the pianos playing in 6 different offices.
That's the gold revolving doors, right?
That was the Brill Building.
Yeah.
We were across the street, 1650, but it's the same kind of building.
Yeah.
I mean, Carole King talks about Donnie Kirshner in the Brill Building in her show Beautiful.
And these days, New York was I think a lot of what's changed in New York, it's not the musically creative city that it was obviously in those days. I think a lot is relocated to LA, singer-songwriters LA, and a lot of music production in LA. I think even when we were working together, it was the last era of, you still had people coming to New York to make their whole album. I'm not so sure that's the way it is anymore.
To tell you, it's 20 years since I've been in the business, so I don't know where they go now.
Yeah.
They stay in their bedroom and use Pro Tools.
Yeah.
No one has to leave the house.
Now we're heading into AI music, which is another.
I know that my children growing up could hear the difference between the drum beat of a real band and a drum machine, and they liked the drum machine better. It never missed. Some of the real bands, they thought it didn't sound right, Dad.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that way with us. It was all real music.
So when you and Norby team up, are you pretty much successful yet? Or are you
in the bar band business, we were great. We were making a living and working comfortable.
Yeah.
Does that mean you have weekends off? No.
You're working all the time, but you have money, you have everything that you want, but you have to work all the time to do it. Like, you're not struggling, you're paying everything, you have nice clothes, nice cars, you go out to eat wherever you want, that's comfortable. But you still have to work your ass off to maintain.
Yes. I mean, comfortable is a relative term.
You're way up.
We're working our way up, and comfortable as we could pay our bills.
Right.
We didn't go to fancy places to eat. Yeah, I mean, I think I took you to quite a few pizza places.
Yeah. But it wasn't whining and dining artists.
Whining and dining artists. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Artists are 18 years old. You can't take them to a restaurant with blue hair women. Yeah. They don't care about that, right?
Yeah.
No. It's not until they have money that they want to go to fancy places.
Right.
They just want to eat.
Yeah. So that's a good description of.
I mean, did you ever wine and dine a rap artist?
I tried in my small way. You know what it was? TGIF. Remember there was a TGIF down the street, 1700 Broadway.
It didn't go over well.
That was whining and dining an artist. They wanted a pina colada.
You're right, a pina colada. There's no whining and dining. An 18 or a 20-year-old, they don't care.
Yeah.
It changed as they got money, but we were always taking artists to dinner and always taking I think I fed every music attorney in New York and every record executive that I could find that would go out with me, and took them to dinner. And they were business dinners. They weren't wining and dining. It was not fancy places.
Yeah.
The Red Eye Grill on those days, and places around Broadway. I spent my entire life, 35 years on Broadway, between 6th Avenue and 7th Avenue. After 1700 Broadway, I moved to 250 West 57th Street, which was between 7th and Broadway. So I spent a whole lifetime on Broadway.
Move.
Yeah, so I spent my life on Broadway.
Yeah. So okay. So we're in the disco era. Let's jump back to the disco era.
Yeah.
Gloria Gaynor, potential big hit, about to happen. How does it all change?
Gloria happens. And I didn't mention this, but I had another band called Peaches and Herb, which was a show band. And they had a manager, Paul Cohen from DC, who gets them a record deal, and he gets Freddie Perrin to produce it. And Freddie Perrin had been a big time producer in those days. And he makes a record called Shake Your Groove Thing. And that was semi-disco, semi-R&B. And if you recall, do you know the record?
I do, yeah.
And it was a crossover record. It played on pop stations, it played on black stations. So it had two formats, and we were able to book the band and get them on tours of some sort. And then he comes with Reunited. And that was a huge international hit, and it took him to a whole nother place. And that group brought us really into the R&B business, because Reunited, although it's played at many, many weddings, white and black and green and purple and whatever, it was a true R&B hit. And it took us and them to another direction. And from there, we found Kool and the Gang, and we found Rick James, and we found George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and we found Frankie Beverly and Confunction and Cameo, which was a big influential group and still is today. And they had 5 gold albums, but they never, I think, really hit the peak. I think they were equal to Prince at the time in their creativity and what they did. But that's how it happened. I think it started with Peaches and Herb.
And that era, I view some of those guys more like funk. They were, right? Do you distinguish R&B and funk, or you just kind of keep it all under the R&B umbrella for yourself?
For myself, I keep it under the R&B umbrella.
Yeah.
It was truly funk.
Yeah.
I mean, it came after the Motown era. It came after Stax Records, but it was Polygram had a great deal of them. There were all kinds of different labels, but Polygram had a lot of them, and we fell into that mix, and that brought us to a whole different place.
And that, once again, was a very much bands, right? They're all bands. They were all bands, and they were all, and it was a party. There was party music.
Yes, and it had
to be a crazy time.
And it was touring. These kids toured. We put them all together, stacked them up, and we sold out arenas across the country. I can remember Rick James with You and I, and then Super Freak. We sold out stadiums.
That had to be another jump. So it was Super Freak like a Gloria Gaynor moment. Was that the next Gloria Gaynor plateau? I mean, different.
Gloria Gaynor was truly a disco artist. Right. She was never considered by me, or I think the real audiences, as an R&B attraction. She was black, and she sang black music, and she came from church. But her hit was an international hit. It was an impact record. It was different. It appealed to white, black, all nationalities. I Will Survive, and that record had a different vibe. I mean, it was a very musical record, lots of strings and lots of orchestration and lots of everything, and it was a big gay record. Okay, I'm locking the door and don't come back anymore. And that appealed to black, white, gay, and straight. So that was a disco anthem. It was an anthem song, and today she still tours based on that record. So, but Peaches and Herb I consider them R&B after Reunited.
Gotcha. And so then you're getting to anything significant between Super Freak and the Kool and the Gang. I mean, the Kool and the Gang had massive smashes, right?
Huge.
Smashes. And I mean,
Luther Vandross fell into that category.
Well, that's a whole, so you had Luther. You had Luther. What would when you stacked them on a tour night? Give me a rough idea who was on that bill.
Well, the funk bands were Cameo, Gap Band, Rick, Kool, Zapp Roger, Frankie Beverly and Mays. The OJs would be some mix of the OJs in there too. That's what the funk tours.
Is this pre-famous or are we famous yet?
We're pre-famous.
This is general
talent.
General talent.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
We're pre-famous, and that's what it looked like. And Rick, certainly, he was competing with Prince, and then George Clinton fell into the fold, and George Clinton would have a group, any combination of the funk bands that are out there, and many new bands. I mean, you had Sky, and you had Whip It. Who was that? Daz Band, and then we had Lakeside, and we had all of the solo records. The Whispers fell into that, and we had all kinds of things like that.
And I mean, that's a lot of artists on one night of music. How long would that show be?
We only have 4 artists.
Oh, okay.
Any combination of 4.
Any combination of 4, okay, good.
Now, Luther was a different character because he came out of the box with, we started with a group called Change, The Glow of Love, which was disco, and a couple of others. And then he came out under his own name, and Never Too Much, which was also an Impact record, and it just took him to a whole nother level, and he became his own attraction. Now, we toured Luther and Patty, and we toured Luther and many people, but it was always Luther and. Luther didn't open for anybody. From the early days on, he just made it right to the top of the mark, and he was a 2 million seller, and he wanted to become more popular to the white audience. Unfortunately, I think he was too good. His sound was so intense, and his singing was so perfect. I think a lot of white audiences couldn't get through it, didn't understand it. I mean, I'll say a story on the side. Aretha, who was a huge white artist, and she broke in the 60s when there was pop radio, but she recorded Muscle Shoals with the Muscle Shoals Band. Those were 4 white guys, and the horns were white, and the drummer was white. Now, I attribute, and I don't think Jerry Wexler or Ahmet Ertegun, they're probably going to roll over when I say this, I attribute a great deal of her success to the fact that she didn't have a black band. She had white guys that sounded black, felt black, played black. Muscle Shoals is in a cotton field in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by all black, and these kids played what they thought was black music, but it didn't have the James Brown feel or a black band feel. There was something that wasn't that, which allowed Aretha to play her true gospel music but get through to white people, I think. I could be wrong, but that's an impression I had of Muscle Shoals and Aretha.
Great Muscle Shoals documentary on Netflix.
Yes, I've seen
Incredible.
that. But I've been there a couple of times also, because I chased Wilson Pickett. He recorded down there.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell us what was it like, going to Muscle Shoals to try to chase Wilson Pickett?
Well, you fly to the middle of nowhere. There's no place to go, and I think
pre cell phone, pre everything.
Yeah, and
you get on a plane, you hear he's going. You don't even really know, do you?
No, you hear about it.
You know he's going for sure.
Yeah, he's going.
He's definitely going to be there.
Yeah, because Jerry Wexler had a place for a lot of black artists. You get on a plane, you go there. There's nothing to do. I think he brought the artists there because there's no bars. There's no nothing. It's a religious place, and you just record it. You go knock on his door and say, I want to represent you. And either you got the job or thrown out. I got thrown out. I didn't get that job. So that's what it was like.
And then you fly home.
And then you fly home.
And try
with
again.
Your tail between your legs, yeah.
Yeah. So also Muscle Shoals, great Clarence Carter.
Clarence Carter, yeah.
Cool.
Oh, they had so many. The Stones recorded there.
Did they really? That's right. Yeah,
and the Allman Brothers recorded there, and Wexler with Aretha, she recorded there many times, and then the fellow who ran the studio, Fame, had a fight with Aretha's manager, and then Wexler brought her to New York, but brought the band to New York to record with them, and then he bought him another studio, bought the band down there into the studio, and that's how that happened.
Very much like the Wrecking Crew, right? A post-Wrecking Crew scenario.
Very similar. Or the Stax band too. Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah.
Stax record.
Good formulas. They all worked well.
Well, they needed backup bands, and these guys were competent musicians, could play anything.
Yep. What was interesting, I mean, off topic, was Wrecking Crew is just like how many of those folk groups that they couldn't even make music. They were folk singers. And they teamed them up with these funky studio musicians who could just let loose and do whatever. And they came up with so many great
hits of the 60s.
Like James Taylor.
So many. Yeah.
And
Mamas and the Papas. I mean, can you imagine the Mamas and the Papas without the Wrecking Crew? It would be the most boring music. It would be Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Well, there's a fella who produced Carole King, Lou Adler, I think helped put some of this together. And he was a West Coast producer, and he just found guys that interpreted his thoughts and the writer's thoughts.
Yeah, I think like what you're saying is true about Aretha is like with the Wrecking Crew, these guys, they didn't have to own that. They could just let loose. And there was no like, this is my music. I'm just an anonymous musician. I can just kind of riff away. And they came up, it was more relaxed than having to go in as whoever artist and make a hit. You know, I think that's why they churned out so many hits in that time. So now we're up to Rick James, Super Freak.
Again,
what's it like going to a Rick James concert at that point? What's it like hanging out with Rick James?
Rick James was a great guy.
Did you spend time with all of these artists, right?
Yes.
Like all of them. Personal time. What's it like with any of them? Specifically Rick James.
Specifically, Rick James was not like anybody else. The guy was a terrific guy. He had manners, he had class, he had style, and he had women. He was a great guy. He was a very bright guy, very smart. And I had met him before he had a hit record, and I remember meeting him in Buffalo, and he pokes me. He said, "I'm Rick James, motherfucker. I'm Rick James." I said, "Don't poke me so hard, Rick." He was right. He was Rick James. He was just a great guy, and he felt he made himself happen, and he was great. I can remember running down Bourbon Street. We were playing the Superdome, and I said, "Rick, run." He said, "Why?" I said, "They're going to kill you because they love you." And they're pulling at his braids, they're pulling at his shirt, they're ripping his clothes off. I said, "Run faster." We ran into a hotel and they locked the doors, and that's how we survived. We were running down Bourbon Street.
But that was a massive pop hit, right? Is that one of the first, I mean, out of that pack of artists of that era, the funk, the R&B, what were the biggest hits other than a Super Freak? I mean, was Kool and the Gang Celebration of that era?
Nothing was like Super Freak.
Right.
And nothing was like George Clinton.
Okay.
And I attribute George Clinton with his Mothership show to having influenced all of rock and roll, because nobody had a show like George Clinton. I mean, George spent all his money on this spaceship and his show, and no one had ever seen a light show like that. I think ELO copied George Clinton. I think a lot of these bands had seen things like George Clinton and couldn't believe what this guy was doing. Now, this guy would make fortunes of money and spend it all on a show. And I do have a funny story about that later in his career, if you want to hear that.
Yeah, sure.
He had just made a record deal with Vivian Scott at Columbia Records, and he was playing Central Park, and there's going to be 100,000 people there, and they're rehearsing. George always seemed to rehearse in Newburgh, New York, at the airplane hangar, and he started that way back when he started Parliament Funkadelic, and because you could hang the ship from the ceiling of an aircraft hangar. So I'd been through a lot with him, and we hadn't been talking for a number of years, but Vivian is now approaching, it might be the early 90s, early 2000s, and she says, "Jerry, I need you to help George. We don't have the Mothership." And so I closed my eyes and said, "What does this mean?" So Archie Ivy, who was his manager at the time, he was a manager for 30 years, we start talking again, and Archie says, "We got a show in 5 days, and I need $250,000 tomorrow to pay off the Mothership." I said, $250,000. I said, "Who do you owe it to?" He says, "Well, we've been up here for about a month. We owe about $75,000 to the Holiday Inn in Fishkill. We owe money for the Mothership. We owe payroll. We owe everything, and we're not going to make it to New York unless you can get here tomorrow with the money." I said, "Yeah, okay, you make it easy, don't you, Archie?" So I ended up going to all the nightclub owners I knew in New York, and I took up a collection for them, and I got the money, and I went up there, and Archie had sent the people who had built the Mothership and had allowed them to rehearse with it without paying for it for a couple of weeks home. And they had the Mothership, and I had to call them, and they were in They were somewhere far away, and I said, you got to come back. He said, no, I didn't get paid. I'm not coming back. You got to come over here, wherever I am. And Eric Wilson was with us at the time, and I said, Eric, get on a plane and get him this money. And he got on a plane, he got him the money. They brought the mothership back, and we made Central Park. But it was pretty tough. But George never missed a show, I have to tell you. This guy didn't cancel dates, he didn't get sick, and he never missed a show. The show must go on.
So George Clinton, I mean, what hits did he have to you? Like, do you have favorite George Clinton songs?
Flashlight, Knee Deep.
Okay, good.
I mean, the guy had 100 different hits. I mean, there's so many hits I can't think of. You know those two. You can remember
I know those
yeah.
two, yeah.
Yeah, those are the two that white people would know. The rest, black kids knew all of them.
Yeah.
Okay? They were the Rolling
Atomic
Stones
Dog.
of black. Atomic Dog,
Yeah.
but that was later on. Bow,
Yeah.
wow, wow, yippee, yo,
Yeah.
yippee, yay.
Yeah.
And the record company never brought it to fruition because that was an enormous song. That's late on in his career.
And who was this Walter Yetnikoff era? Who was it?
Well, George Clinton was with Warner Brothers.
Okay, gotcha.
And there was George Clinton, Bootsy's Rubber Band, the Horny Horns, the Brides of Funkenstein. There's all that stuff. And he sold out arenas and stadiums also.
And when we're talking state, is that 60,000 people? Or is it more?
Oh, yeah.
It's easily more than 60,000.
And then up until today, he still sells out nightclubs. And he's 80.
And when you went around to the clubs, how did you collect 250,000? What did you tell the clubs?
I told him the truth. I need the money. I had been in
Just a loan.
I had been in New York for years. I'll give it back to you after we play Central Park. And Eric knew people too.
Yeah.
And we went to everybody to borrow money to try and get, because then we weren't taking checks.
Right. Yeah. and then what was the Central Park gig worth?
I probably got paid $100,000 for it.
And where'd the rest of the 150 come from?
Oh, he had to sign to us for a few years.
Oh, is that what it was? An advance?
He paid us back. It became an advance.
Good.
Yes. Yeah, he
That's-
paid it off
I'm
slowly
wondering how
but
that-
surely.
I'm wondering how that worked
But
out.
George always stood up. He was a stand-up guy, difficult, but a creative genius.
Yeah.
And he never missed a date. He was great.
Where was like a Sly and the Family Stone in that era?
That was a little
West
before
Coast
me.
thing?
That's
Or- it was
60s.
That was 60s. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't there then.
Gotcha.
But I met Sly. Actually, George Clinton took Sly under his wing and toured with him for a few months. And Sly always needed people to pee in his jar to send the urine home for a test.
Sly, incredible.
Another
To me,
genius talent.
complete genius.
Yeah, I mean, he could sit down and write a song and he'd forget it when he woke it up. But he had a great song.
Yeah. So where do we go from? How does it evolve from? Where are we at with this? What was the next big moment after the George Clinton, that era, the funk?
Well,
the funk
that
band era?
was the early 80s. And then
You're doing Coliseum, doing big shows now.
doing huge
massive
shows with
stuff.
everybody.
Super. Now let's keep track with your Jerry Aid's level of success. Whole new level. Are we buying houses yet? Or are we?
no, I'm not buying anything.
No Mercedes yet.
No, I've always had a Mercedes.
You did,
but
okay.
that's like chump change.
Okay.
That's not like a big deal.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, did I have a house? I had a house, but there was never big spending. It was working.
Right.
I had the New Edition, and I'll tell you the story. And we played. I can remember we played 3 shows a night at the Beacon Theater, and then somehow we ended up at the Apollo. And they were very, very popular. New Edition was like a New Kids on the Block.
Pre though, right? Pre.
Yeah, it was the 70s.
Yeah.
And I can remember I had booked him at a place called Westbury Music Fair. I didn't think anybody was there because it was an afternoon show, and there were no cars in the parking lot. I said, oh, this is going to be a disaster. Well, it was sold out. The parents dropped the kids off, and it was a traffic jam to go home. Anyhow, so we ended up at the Apollo, and at the Apollo, I heard this guy named DJ Hollywood. He played in between the acts, and he played music, real fun, happy, up-tempo, some kind of funk, or it wasn't funk, it was R&B, funk, something, and he talked over it. And he had a couple of songs. Some would be faster, some would be slower, some would be more melodic. He didn't sing, but he talked. And that was the first time I heard rap. And in between the sets, the kids didn't want him to stop. He was a huge success. They were screaming and yelling and cheering and clapping every time DJ Hollywood came out. And he opened the show. He played in between. He was the closer. And I heard this and I said, wow, this is incredible. And right around that time, Russell Simmons managed a band called Curtis Blow, These Are the Breaks, and that became one of the #1 records in America, and was a black record. I'll go into Curtis Blow, but simultaneous to that, a year later came Sylvia Robinson with the Sugar Hill Gang. She produced it, and Sugar Hill Records. But Curtis Blow, we represented the Commodores, and we were going to put them on to open the tour. And Benny Ashburn, Russell and I went to visit him. Benny Ashburn was the manager of the Commodores at the time, and I asked $3,500 for Curtis Blow, which was about as much as any opening act would get at the time in the 1980 late 70s. And Benny says he doesn't have a band. I'm not paying him that. He says, I want to speak to Russell. I don't want to talk to you. So Russell's in the room. I said, Russell, you tell him. When Russell got through with Benny Ashburn, he got paid $3,500 because he wasn't going to get the #1 record in America to open for the Commodores for anything less. And that began a long relationship with Russell Simmons and the Def Jam Records and many of the clients on Def Jam.
And so that was was that pre-Def Jam, because that was Rush Management, right?
That was Rush Management. Yeah. Curtis was I think again on Polygram. That was pre-Rush, but Def Jam Records. But then Def Jam, Russell got a deal, and it was Public Enemy. It was LL Cool J. It was the Beastie Boys. It was. Many more, many other. And
when would Russell come to you and say, Jerry, you're having all of our artists?
No.
And you had to go after each one individually.
Russell had a partner named Leor Cohen at the time, and Leor wanted to bring the bands to other places, and we had to always convince Leor and Russell why they should stay in one place. And I think they tried bringing one of the bands somewhere, and it didn't really work out because I can remember in those days, white agents didn't really think much of rap. They thought these kids are talking. That's not real music. That's nothing. And the fact is, it was real music. It was beyond real music. I want to talk about the Sugar Hill Gang for a second, because the Sugar Hill Gang only had a 12-inch record, Rapper's Delight. These Are the Breaks. And it never made the chart. How do you have a record that's the #1 record in America? It's played on every radio station, black, white, pop, progressive. Everybody played the Sugar Hill Gang. We sold out stadiums in Lyon, France, in Paris, in London, in Amsterdam. We sold out shows all over America. Never made the R&B charts because they wouldn't chart a 12-inch record. Now, I have never been involved with a phenomena like this because you had Rick James. You knew how many records this guy sold. He was a phenomena. So was Sugar Hill Gang, and they never really got the credit. And then behind them came Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, another international blockbuster. Incredible. Again, 12 inches. I don't remember if they made the chart by this time because it was ludicrous for Billboard not to put this kind of record on the charts. But another phenomenon, never got the credit for it.
What year are we at, you think?
Well, Sugar Hill Gang and Curtis were both 1980. Grandmaster Flash was 81, 82, 83, in that area. And at the same time Russell came with the Beasties, Russell came with LL, Russell came with the Public Enemy, Russell came with, I think Montel Jordan was later on, but he hit Slick Rick, all kinds of stuff.
So with George Clinton, was he signed to an exclusive agency agreement?
George Clinton was never signed to our company. However, George was an honorable guy, is an honorable guy. And if you were his agent, you were his agent. And everything went through you, and I had him for many years. And I'll tell you a little story about the first time I met his manager. He was a Spanish guy. Nene was his name. And he comes into my office for a 10 a.m. meeting. I'm sitting at my desk with my double-breasted suit on and my tie, and Nene says, get up, I want to borrow your chair. I get up, and he sits there, puts his feet on my desk, whips out a 6-pack of Beck's beer, and he then drops a great deal of cocaine on my desk and starts snorting it. It took him about 15 minutes to finish the 6-pack of beer, and we talked about what was going to happen with the upcoming tour. But I'd never had a skinny guy. He was a very tall, thin guy, handsome man, with his cowboy boots on my desk and a pile of cocaine and beer at 10 a.m. George Clinton.
And it was a productive meeting?
I will say George Yes, it was a very productive meeting because we booked the tour. But I will say, George, if I can tell you, if you recall, I came to your rescue when you were going to play at Central Park, and Archie was there, and you didn't have the money to pay for the mothership, and they had just pulled out of the driveway. And I had to come up with a great deal of cash and bail you out so you could get the mothership back. Now I understand the mothership is sitting in the Smithsonian, but there's no tag that says, "Thank you, Jerry, for getting my mothership back so I could play Central Park." Just wanted to get that one in, George. But I love you anyhow.
And so this all then went from New Edition, which we spoke about, to DJ Hollywood, to you recognizing the relevance and the significance of hip hop with Curtis.
I didn't know it wasn't called hip hop then. This was just talking guy, a guy talking over records.
And you witnessed that at the Apollo, and then from there how did you meet up with? How did you get connected to? So Jerry Ade at the time with General Talent is the first booking agent to actually take a chance and book hip hop music, rap music at that era, 1979, 1980?
That's absolutely true. I first heard it with DJ Hollywood at the Apollo, and then Russell comes out with a song called Christmas Rapping, which I think was 79, and then he comes with the breaks, and then comes Sylvia Robinson. And as you know, as being an agent, you were kind of tied into radio stations and promoters all around the country, and you got a handle on what was selling in what parts of the country. And there was this record I heard about called Rapper's Delight, and it was produced by Sylvia Robinson, and her husband owned the record company Sugar Hill Records. And I went over to Sylvia and Joe, and I made a presentation and said, I want to represent you guys. I want to book you around the world. I want to do whatever there is to do. And they were kind enough to give me the job, and it was absolutely a phenomenon. I don't think to this day any record has sold what Sugar Hill Gang sold. I said it earlier in this interview that this thing was gargantuan, and it made a big impact on the world. And from that came Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and then came Russell with all of Def Jam, and it just never stopped from there.
When you went over to Sylvia, you mentioned that so casually, but how did you how did you track down Sylvia and Joe?
Well, I had relationships with DJs all over America. I mean, from Louisiana to Detroit, and they were black DJs because I was leaning toward the black music, and they said Sugar Hill Records. I found out where they were because there was a New York-based company. It was distributed by Morris Levy, and I found out where they were. I found out their studio, and he had been in business for many years. He started with the Moments long time ago, before Sugar Hill, and Sylvia with Pillow Talk, who was her own artist. It was an artist in her own right, and I just made a phone call and said I'd like to come and see, and they said come on over. And that was the start of a long relationship, and we went through a lot of hits and a lot of places all over the world together.
And obviously they know who you are at this point. You're not just some new agent calling up. You're Jerry Ade, who had the entire funk era.
Yeah, however, there was probably no agents calling up. I have to tell you that in the early days, I was ridiculed by most of the white agents from the larger companies. And they would tell me, I remember I went to the Grammys, and we had many artists every year, were nominated for the Grammys, and we represented them. I can remember being backstage to the agents that represented the white bands would poo-poo me. And one of them said to me, "You book the talking niggers." I said, "Yeah, I do." And it was early on, and they never got credit for the impact that they were going to make on the world, the rap artists, and what they did for culture, pop music in America around the world. So yes, I did book the Talking Niggers, and it was my honor and my pleasure to have that opportunity.
And you saw you had the vision ultimately, and you enjoyed it. You liked the music. Right?
I loved the music. I said, the first time I heard DJ Hollywood, I knew whatever was going to happen after this had to be big because it was great. And if you recall, Sugar Hill Gang was a fun band. I mean, a hotel, motel, Holiday Inn, let's have a party. Put your hands in the air. And rap started out as fun music. These are the breaks. Break it up, break it up, break it up, break down. And from that came all kinds of different things. I mean, we had Tone Loc, we had Vanilla Ice, we had a lot of different rap, and then became cultural, and it became music that described people's lives in different parts of the world and in the ghetto.
And so you went from this relationship with Russell from Curtis Blow to Russell then starting Def Jam, Rush Management to Def Jam, and then the Beasties. How did you find out about the Beasties?
Well, we had a relationship with Russell, and he had talked about coming out with this, and he had Rick Rubin as a co-producer on the Beasties, and it was going to be a big record, they thought. And it was a gargantuan record, and they were right. And these were three white guys that were, to me, they were awkward. They weren't like black rappers. They were white rappers, and they were characters. And they had this big penis that came on stage, and that it would get erect, and the girls would throw their bras and panties up at them, and we got shut down in New Jersey by the police because they didn't want big penises popping up. It was a hydraulic, must have been a 25-foot penis, and it looked like one. And they took rap to the white kids, and they were early on, and they opened it up to the white world in a different way.
And what were the Beasties getting a night? What did they start off with? Do you remember like how much first Beastie shows to how quickly it went to?
It went like that to the Beastie Boys.
Like the first shows, what kind of money are we talking for the Beasties?
$5,000, and then they toured, and then we toured small arenas. We toured theaters, 2,500 seats, and we had to 5,000 seats, and then it became arenas. It was a cultural phenomena. Rap is a cultural phenomena. It said things to kids in a different way that their mom and dad couldn't speak of, and their mom and dad didn't listen to that music.
And people forget, Beasties was kind of like 85, 86.
Yes.
It was super early.
It was very early, and they were the first white guys to really come and do it.
Super early, and they had Russell and Rick guiding them, and they were culturally appropriate.
Absolutely. And they were a rock and roll band of rap. Okay, and there's a lot
of mashup.
Yeah, it was just a phenomena, and the album cover of an airplane joint. I mean, it said everything to the kids, they said things. You have to fight for your right to party.
That album was incredible. I mean,
incredible, yes.
So, Beast, can you recall a year of the Beasties and what they grossed roughly? Do you remember thinking, shit, this group grossed $10 million on the road this year?
Well, hang on. Tickets in those days were $9 and $10. In 1980, we had Evelyn Champagne King with Shame and Rick James on the road, and they were paying $8.50 in St. Louis.
So what was a whole night of that? What did the agency bring for a whole night of that?
If you got $40,000 a night, it was a big deal. It was a lot of money in 1980 to 85.
What do you think that is in today's standards?
$150,000 a night.
Okay, well that's interesting.
Yes, I mean tickets. The New Kids was a group that we represented also, produced by Maurice Starr, another black writer, singer, producer himself. Our top ticket was $25, and at that time we had the highest grossing tour in America. We grossed $50 million for one of our tours, but we had a top of $25 a ticket. You go to tickets now, there's $500, $600, $700, $800. I mean, Taylor Swift sells $1,000 tickets.
True.
$1,500 tickets. So the grosses don't seem like much in those days.
But what year was New Kids? Do you recall?
Yeah, 1987 to 95.
Okay, gotcha. So in a year, you might have had the Beasties on the road. You might have had the New Kids on the road. Potentially.
No, the Beasties were gone. No, but on the road, we would have the New Kids. We'd have George. We'd have Rick was gone by that time. We'd have Luther. We'd have Patti LaBelle. We'd have Kool and the Gang. We'd have all kinds of different bands.
What do you think in black music booking? What do you think percentage of market share your efforts dominated in those years?
In those years, we represented at least 60% of the black charts. If you were a black artist, we represented 60 out of 100, and that lasted for about 15 years.
That's major. That's incredible.
It was incredible. It was an incredible run.
And then hip hop came along.
And hip hop, I can still consider it black music, but you changed it to the name hip hop. Your era.
Yeah.
To me, it was all black music. It was rap.
Yeah.
It wasn't called hip hop until, I guess, 2000. I guess. maybe before, I don't know.
People have been, they just said 50 years of hip hop. Who knows? That's your friend Rocky just coined that at the Hip Hop Museum.
Oh, Rocky Buchanan.
Yeah.
Oh, Rocky, I got another one for you. First person ever to book hip hop or black music. Hello. Involve me somehow. Give me a shout. I know we know each other on Facebook, so I look forward to hearing from you.
You know what would be amazing at that museum if they did a straight up booking exhibit? They do these thematic curated things on eras and one specifically on booking. Like we were sharing today, just some of the mementos, and people are fascinated by this sort of stuff. This is like, we can zoom in on this later, but I'll just hold it up. The artists that were getting booked, what they got in those days. This is interesting for a museum. Jay-Z getting $15,000 a show. I mean, this is documented history. Jay-Z now wouldn't take a dump for $15,000. You know,
I mean, you're talking 30 years ago here, 35 years ago.
Yeah.
Jay-Z, you know how old he is now. He wasn't a young man.
Yeah.
He was a young man in those days. He's no longer.
And Destiny's Child at $2,500 a night.
First record, Vincent Herbert, No, No, No.
But a museum, this is what exhibits are nowadays. It's things like this. It's like, wow, look who was doing what, when. And that's what we should do, Rocky. But back to the story is basically, so first man to book hip hop ever, and we're going from the Beastie era. Did you book Public Enemy?
Oh, our company did. Kara Lewis and our company was.
When did Kara come into?
Kara started as my secretary way back when I don't know, very, very early on. She was 18 years old. I think I was 30.
General Talent still?
No, it was Norby Walters' days.
Norby Walters.
And she was a secretary, and we worked together, and she was a natural, and she very bright girl, very smart, and I went on vacation, and she was an agent.
No.
When I came back.
Are you serious?
Yes.
And you did that to me with Mantisha Chen.
I went away for a weekend. That was my vacation, and she came.
That's the lesson you
Norby
get.
said, "You're going to be an agent."
That's the lesson you get, right? Jeez.
Yeah, but Kara's
Don't take a vacation, in other words.
a great booker, a great purveyor.
Well, you know, she's shy. You might not realize, but famous. We're talking about Eric B. and Rakim Paid in Full intro, where they say Norby Walters is our. Bert. They might shut up.
They said Norby Walters.
Norby Walters, Kara Lewis is our agent,
Yes.
and we're going to get paid in full. So, interestingly enough, Eric B. and Rakim shouting out a Jerry Ade famous artist discovery creation. Right? There's been a lot of creations out of the General Talent Jerry Ade.
I think the General Talent famous. The only competitors I really had were people that had worked for us, and we had a great crew of people. Listen, guys leave for a lot of different reasons. Aaron, you're one of them. They have power to go out and start their own businesses or go to work for larger companies. And my toughest competitors were the people that I trained.
Yeah, yeah. So how does it evolve from Norby Walters to General Talent? Have we touched on that? The name changes. Why name changes, and how do we get to famous artists? That's an important chunk?
Well, name changes. We were getting so big that the name Norby Walters wasn't appropriate for a single person because we had lots of employees and lots of people, myself and other guys that became partners in the firm, and we became General Talent. And from General Talent to famous, Norby was in the football business at one time, and we ran into trouble with that, and he was indicted out of the Midwest, and I took the company over from him, and he left the business, and I took over from him.
God, you can't get a better name than General Talent. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like,
I thought famous was pretty good also.
Famous is great, but General Talent, could it be any more descriptive?
No.
You know what I mean?
Talent.
What do? We just got General Talent over. It's like this general supply store. A little something. You need canned soup. What do you need? What do you want? A chicken noodle? You want a Rick James? What do you want? We have it at the General Talent store.
Okay.
But famous was nice. Famous, you jazzed it up.
Well, it was jazzed up with General Talent. We maintained it.
Yeah,
it was a good run.
And then famous. So we're booking hip hop of the 85, 86 era. We were talking about the New Kids, how that came in. That was around the same time, right?
87.
Yeah.
And that's about when I took over General Talent and started Famous on my own.
And New Kids was just a massive. I mean, what point do you?
New Kids weren't around then. They were just. I can remember meeting Maurice Starr asking me to come to Boston to see this new group, and when I went to visit them, I was taller than all of them.
They were the new toddlers on the block.
They were new toddlers on the block, and he allowed me to book them, and I had booked New Edition before them for a number of years, quite a few years, and then that's how.
Did any of that tie back to? I didn't know you had Boston, or you kind of started your career in Boston, booking bar in college. Did any of that connect? And any relationships? Nothing.
No, none of that connected. Maurice came from the Carolinas, and he moved to Boston. I don't know how he moved to Boston, but that's where he and his family did. It was called the. I can't remember. He had a family band. His brother was in the band, and all kinds of stuff.
Gotcha.
Like that.
So when do you feel you became a super agent?
I never felt I became a super agent. It's like anything else, Aaron. In business, you do the best you can, and you compete with everyone else. There always seemed to be a guy that had a lot of bigger bands, like the guy who had Billy Joel, or the guy that had Elton John, or the guy that had
Grateful Dead.
Grateful Dead. They were bigger than we were.
Very different, though. Very different.
It's all different.
Yeah.
But I had what we had, and I never quite looked at it.
You were like in an emerging.
We were in a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
And we rode this wave that was great. I happened to love the music, and it was a lot of fun. And during that time, we didn't mention Eazy-E, NWA.
Public Enemy leads to NWA, kind of same evolutionary sonic sound.
Well,
revolutionary music. F the Police.
Well, Dr. Dre was in a band called the West Coast Wrecking Crew,
right,
managed by Jerry Heller and Maury Alexander. And I remember talking to those guys a lot about it. And by the time Easy NWA came around, we had a lot of hip hop and a lot of familiarity with that kind of stuff. And Jerry was their manager. Difficult guy. He had been an agent himself for many, many years. Had a lot of big bands in the early days. Anyhow, he allowed us to book the band, and Dre was in that band. And there was a split up after a few years, and we did the first big tour, Fuck the Police. I can remember we had a lot of fun in Detroit when they shut us down. As soon as they sang this song, the police came running out from everywhere and cleared the theater.
Did you watch the movie by any chance, Straight Outta Compton?
Yes.
Okay. Accurate?
I think that Jerry Heller was slandered out of that movie. He worked really hard. He tried. He sided with Eazy-E. He didn't side with the talent. Dre was the talent without a doubt. He produced all the records. He was influential in writing the songs.
A writer as well.
Yeah. So he sided with the wrong guys, and that's the way it went. So I don't know the intricacies of his relationship with each artist, but maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But I know that he did the best he could.
But Jerry was with World Class Wrecking Crew?
No, Dre,
right?
Yeah,
you were booking World Class Wrecking Crew.
No, we didn't. We talked about it.
There
wasn't. Yeah, I was aware of it. The records were never very.
That was kind of like I don't remember how far apart those.
A long time ago. Yeah. That was the early days, right. And Dre wore a wig.
Exactly. Dre was like almost, it was almost that post-disco rap era.
Yeah,
guys were dressed still.
Exactly. Early rap. Yeah.
Stuff. So NWA comes along and you get a phone call from Jerry Heller.
I called Jerry Heller. I heard the record was happening.
You heard of it. The DJs again.
DJs. We had a network of DJs all over America.
Did you have a conference call? You just called them up regularly?
I called them up regularly every week. That was my ticket to figuring out
radio DJs or club DJs? Or
radio and club.
Okay.
But radio in particular, I mean, listen, they had to be certain kinds of radio stations. They weren't playing Fuck the Police on the radio. Yeah. So it was an underground record, and it was just massive. It spoke to kids that felt that the police were fucking them.
Well, that album was just incredible.
Yeah.
That Straight Outta Compton album was Fuck the Police was a massive hit, but they had a lot of different types of songs on there. They were not this angry rap group. They could be that. What was nice about a group like that, they were just very diverse. There was a lot. Dre made a lot of. He was just a great producer, and they had great writing and the different. It was just a great rap ensemble of the era.
Dre's a genius.
He's a genius. He's proven it again and again.
Yeah, over and over. You don't keep having hits if you're not a genius.
But so you went after that. You knew Jerry Heller already. You called him, Jerry. I want this. You have to fly to LA. It's the West Coast thing. You go to LA. Or-
Yeah, and I remember
or done over before?
Easy was the head of the group at the time.
Okay.
And I pitched Easy. He was in bed. I'm in the hotel room with Jerry Eller. And I make a presentation to Easy. Anyhow, I got the job.
What's the presentation like? Any idea what you say to Easy?
No, I'm not going to go through that.
Was it?
No, it's like any business. You're not talking casually.
No.
You're talking about their life.
Yeah.
You're talking about their income. They want to know that they can make money. They want to know you can do it.
But they've heard it all before. They've heard a lot of bullshit. You have to cut through. You have to be pretty Jerry-ade.
No, yet the manager heard a lot of bullshit. These are young kids.
Yeah.
I remember they weren't old. They didn't have successful lives before this. They didn't know anything about touring. Somehow they had to feel that you knew what you were doing and that their manager brought you in because he believed that you could do the job. And you had to say things. It was a business presentation. I was wearing a suit and tie and Easy was in bed.
Yeah.
So I didn't take it casually. There was no fooling around going on. There was no joking. This was a business presentation. They were worth millions upon millions of dollars in touring, and I treated it like that.
Yeah.
And I took it very seriously with everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure you had a very convinced. I can only imagine. I don't think you were joking around at all. I can only imagine the things that you said to get the job.
Well, I didn't always get the job, but I got
you damn well said as much as you could to get it.
Yeah, and you had to say it very seriously.
Yeah.
It wasn't a joke.
No joking. But to get Easy was technically a drug dealer of the time, whether he was a kid or not, gangster drug dealer. And you had to be pretty convincing, is all.
Yeah, I mean, I treated it seriously.
Yeah.
It was a business presentation. It wasn't a casual meeting.
Yeah. And you had those guys for any idea how long you had?
As long as they were together, we had.
As they were together.
Yeah.
So that's a bunch of tours.
A bunch of tours. They didn't tour a lot because they were in the studio a lot, and I helped them make the deal for Michelet and JJ Fad on Mirage Records, distributed by Atlantic with Jerry Greenberg, and they were busy. They didn't tour that much.
Gotcha. And then then you had the Funky Cold Medina Tone Loc kind of coming on the tail end of that.
Yeah.
In LA.
And the Young MC.
In the Young MC, that's Delicious Vinyl era. And that was like MTV now.
Yeah.
How did that change the touring business? Because I'm pretty sure Young MC and Tone Loc were the first MTV rap darlings that got popped.
Interesting. I think you're right. I don't remember exactly who the first were, but when MTV first started, it helped touring a lot because although it was 24 hours a day, you didn't see 24 hours of black music and you didn't see all the rap music. It helped more the pop artists and the crossover artists than it did the rappers. And it was never really big for rap, but it made artists touring a lot easier because kids could see it there, they could go see their fans, they were still buying records. Everything changed with the advent of Napster and theft.
We're at like 88, 89. You had the whole 90s there. Well, NWA goes into the 90s. Rap was in a weird space in the 90s. I'm trying to think like what you would be booking.
Well, we didn't book.
Rap.
Listen,
what was the 90s like for you? It kind of, you might have went into freestyle in that era.
We had in the company, we had all kinds of musical artists. In the 80s was the heyday of pop music, I think. And certainly the black artists had some great songs, LTD and James Ingram and SOS Band and the Whispers and that whole crew, and certainly the Temps and the Tops. We were booking those kinds of things. So rap never faded.
Right.
There was always stuff happening. I think you've got the booking sheets from the 90s.
Yeah.
We were very busy.
97 was very busy. But I'm trying to think of like, okay.
And 98 was the Jay-Z Hard Knock Life tour.
Yeah.
And that he wasn't a big tour either. He didn't tour a lot.
No,
not at all. And
that tour alone was a big moment for hip hop. That was the next big. But I don't want to jump right there yet, Jerry. I want to go to.
You said what happened in the 90s?
Yeah, I'm saying, well, you described very vividly the 80s, the 79 into 80, right?
Yeah.
So with 89 into 90, do you have any memories of an 89? You know, every decade everything changes. Do you have any, even 88 or 89 or 90 when you're like, oh, it's all changed again?
Yes, the funk bands were winding down, and they weren't replaced by a group of new funk bands. Mm-hmm. That wasn't really happening. The 90s, I think, it was a transitional period. I think the market knew and somebody knew that MTV was changing things a lot. It didn't hurt touring, but for the white bands, they became overexposed. And I can tell you that in the year 1990, I think there were 136 concerts at Madison Square Garden. In the year 2000, there were only 36.
Wow.
So that's a solid 35% of the business, 70% of the business went away, evaporated, because MTV brought you the artist. You could see it at any time. And I said, during all of the 90s, you had MTV, VH1, BET, The Box, Super Nintendo, Super Mario, and a variety of other distractions that we didn't have in the 80s. And that was all taking from the money, the games that the kids would spend on records. And I can remember when I was a kid in school, if you bought the record, you were pretty committed. If you went to the concert, you became a fan and you bought subsequent records. And that's why bands lasted for 10 and 12 years. Well, the 90s, there were so many other things for kids to spend money on that things changed. And I could see a slowdown. We kept very busy because ghetto kids didn't have all those things. Ghetto kids didn't necessarily have Super Nintendo. And they didn't have a lot of excess money, but they had their music. So we stayed busy. And it wasn't until 2000 that I knew that things had changed. Napster changed everything. It gave all of the music away for free. All the people that were writing and creating this stuff couldn't get paid. And the young man that I was always so angry with him because he was so arrogant to think that you could steal this music and give it to people. And I do know that AOL, Steve Case, believed that he wanted to give away movies and music for free on AOL as content. And I know that he bought Warner Brothers for a few minutes. AOL bought Warner Brothers, Time Warner. And his whole deal was to give away music and film. Well, Warner Brothers wasn't having it. There were more millionaires in the Warner Brothers group of writers and producers and movie makers that made money. Warner's paid them great if you were a creator and could make hits. And they weren't about to give that away for free on AOL. That company split up pretty quickly. But that brought it to changes. By the time we got to 2000, I said the music business had changed forever. I didn't know how anybody was going to get paid, and to this day, we don't have the touring attractions that we used to have. And we don't have the focused concentration. Kids have too many distractions and other things to do.
Why do you think just that the funk band, because when you look at the funk bands, they were so talented, so dynamic, such great songs, still to this day, incredible songs, so different. So creative, right? I mean, the funk era, all those bands that you list off, still can pack a dance floor with any one of them. I mean, still hits upon hits upon hits upon hits. And why do you think that era ended and no one continued on with musical instruments?
It's pretty funny. Rap came about, in my opinion, in 1985. It started to really explode because they stopped music in the New York City schools. When I went to school, you could be a horn player or a drummer or a keyboardist or a violinist, and the school would supply the instrument and give you lessons. And you were in the orchestra, you were in the marching band, you did things. All of that dried up in America, along with the advent of MTV, VH1, BET, The Box, Sega Genesis, and many other things. Between 90 and 2000, the internet started to take a hold, and they started giving everything away, and the school budgets got tight, music stopped, so rap became a natural way of doing something you couldn't afford to do. You didn't learn an instrument now, so you took someone else's music and talked over it. It was a natural progression.
Gotcha. In the 90s, any notable tours that come to mind? Big tours, anything that...
Lots.
Yeah.
I mean, Luther Vandross never stopped.
Right.
Patti LaBelle never stopped. The Temps and the Tops never stopped.
And LL only got bigger. You were always LL's agent.
Yeah.
For
most of his career until he went into the TV.
Yeah. So LL was still going,
and he was always flirting with other agents. So it was a tough struggle. But rap was always big.
And then here comes and then kind of I mean, when you get into 92, 93, you got the Wu-Tang comes on the scene.
Oh, Wu-Tang. We forgot about the Wu-Tang.
You have really Biggie and Puffy and Bad Boy era.
Yeah, we have.
And then you had Total, which you had.
Yeah.
And you have that whole kind of Puffy
We didn't have anything with Puffy.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did have Wu-Tang, which was Steve.
But you did have
Rifkin.
you did have a run-in.
Oh, Puffy!
With
My partner Eric Wilson and I went to visit a fellow at MC Records named Steve Stout.
Around the corner.
Right around the corner, and he was the head of something. And as we're sitting in the meeting, Puffy walks in with about 3 guys, picks up a bottle that was behind Steve's desk. It was a little showcase, champagne bottle, and he hit him over the head with it. Steve goes falling off his chair, hits the floor. Eric and I decided to dismiss ourselves. we parted and let that happen. And that's what happened.
I remember you guys coming back around to the office and me being able to hear that secondhand.
It was unbelievable.
That happened. And that I believe that was the classic Puffy Steve Stout story where the music video with Nas. Steve managed Nas. We were always trying to get Nas.
Right.
Eric and I went out to Nas's house a number of times.
Right.
And we were always trying to get Nas. We had him here and there. And that was a Nas featuring Puffy song, You Hate Me Now, where they both were on crosses on the video. And Nas, whoever said, no, take that out.
Puffy said, take it out.
And then they didn't.
And Steve Stout didn't.
And that was the thing of that. But I think Steve got a big check on that, on his head, and a check in his hand.
I don't know what he got. All I know is he got hit over the head, big time. And
was there blood?
I got out. It wasn't nice. But I do have a story about reggae in the 80s.
Oh, nice.
And it was a tour. Again, it was Jimmy Cliff and Peter Tosh. Jimmy Cliff was The Harder They Come was a movie he made, and I Can See Clearly Now, and had a number of other hits.
Is that Chris Blackwell stuff?
It wasn't Chris Blackwell stuff, but he came out. They came out of the Wailers. These 2 guys They were in that group down there, and Chris Blackwell, but they hated one another. Jimmy Cliff was a political guy. He didn't trust the government and was very unhappy with what was going on in Jamaica. And I said it wrong. Peter Tosh was a political guy, and Jimmy Cliff was love, peace, and joy. But they got a new manager named Danny Sims, a guy from New York, who was in the record business. It was with the Wailers. He actually was the publisher for Bob Marley. And he had come to us and said, can you put a tour together with these two guys? We said, we'd like to, but I understand they don't like one another. He says, no, they hate each other, but I have them coming out on CBS Records simultaneously, and we need to tour. So Norby and I go to Jamaica, and we have a meeting the first night with Jimmy Cliff. And Jimmy Cliff lives in a palatial mansion in the flats of Jamaica. We go to this place, and his brother answers the door, and his brother was a co-manager with Danny. And he takes us to the library. Norby, myself, Jimmy Cliff, Danny Sims, and his brother. About 5 minutes later, the doorbell rings. I said, I'll get it. I'm right by the door. And it's a pretty long walk from the door to the library. It's a big house. And as soon as I get before the door stinks. It smells like a toilet. I open the door, and there's this Jamaican Rastafarian guy with gray hair, and he's got dreadlocks from his tip of his head down to his waist. He says, yeah, man. I said, well, Jimmy's a little busy. We're having a meeting with him. He says, I'm part of this meeting, man. Let me in. And he just walks right past me, and you can smell him as he walks by, and he walks in, and he sits down, and Jimmy and Danny and Jimmy's brother all say hello, and they introduce us to him as, this is Mortimer, and he's going to be part of the meeting. So we have some small talk. And by the way, the meeting started at 11 p.m. And so we're having a little small talk. It's now about 11:30, 11:40. And Mortimer pulls in his pocket and whips out a pile of pot as a newspaper, and he rolls a joint in newspaper. And he passes it to Jimmy's brother, then it goes to Jimmy, then it goes to Danny, then it comes to me. I said, no, I pass. It goes to Norby, no, and then it goes back to Mortimer. And this goes around about 3 times. And so the only 2 straight people in the room are Norby and myself. Within 5 minutes, everyone's asleep. Jimmy's asleep, Danny's asleep, and his brother's asleep. It's just Mortimer, Norby, and myself. And we start talking. And it says, Mortimer says you're going to do a tour. What's going on? So we start to pitch Mortimer. He's the only guy awake in the room. It's now 11:30, and we go into our routine about what we're going to do for Tosh and Cliff and what it meant for Jamaica, what it meant for reggae, what it meant for Danny, Jimmy, and Peter, and what it meant for us. And he asked us all these questions that I didn't understand how he knew about touring. He'd talk about buses and planes and hotels and who's going to take care of this and money and who's going to pick up the money, and if you do the business you want, this is going to be worth a lot, what's going on. He asked us dozens upon dozens of questions that were all relevant and pertinent to touring. So we leave that night about 2 a.m. No one's awake but Mortimer, and he walks us to the door, and we leave. So the next morning we have a meeting with Peter Tosh. It's 8 a.m. and Peter lives up the mountain in this home at the top of the mountain. The first thing he does is offer us a pipe filled with pot, and we said, no, we'll just have breakfast with you. He says nothing, and he's a scary looking guy. He's got hair down to here, and he doesn't smile. He's pretty rough. Doesn't say much of anything. We pitch him like we pitched Mortimer. It took an hour and a half or 2 hours. And we got in the car and left. We go back to the hotel and try and get Danny, the manager, on the phone. But we can't get Danny. We spend another night down there. Can't get Danny. We spend another night, can't get Danny. We go home. We don't hear from Danny, so I stopped calling. It wasn't worth calling anymore. So for 3 weeks later, I get a call from Danny Sims, and he says, when do we start? I said, when do we start what? He said, the tour. I said, what tour? He says, well, Mortimer says you're okay, so when do we start? I said, who the hell is Mortimer? Mortimer was the Rastafarian chief. And if you go online and look up Mortimer, he's online. He was the Rastafarian chief. And for 20 years after that, if I went to Jamaica and said, check me out with Mortimer, I got the band. And that's how we remember we had Shabba Ranks, and we had Patra, and we had a number of other ones that came out of Jamaica. And it became, you can't judge a book by its cover.
Wow.
We gave respect to Mortimer, and he gave us the job.
Wow. And when that Peter Tosh, it was a Peter Tosh Jimmy Cliff tour? Or?
Peter Tosh, Jimmy Cliff, we sold out 106 arenas around the world.
Was it the Legalize It thing or no?
I don't remember the name of it. It might have been.
What?
I don't remember the name. All I know is that it kept us very busy.
Wow. Was this Peter Tosh on CBS? Was that the Rolling Stone when they had signed him at one point?
No, it wasn't. Okay. This was Danny Sims, who had signed him to Columbia.
Wow, that's incredible.
No, you never know who you're talking to.
86?
Yes.
So 86, you had something like that going on with the Beasties.
We had 25 tours going on at any given time.
Going on is insane.
Oh, you asked us what happened in the 90s. We had the New Kids on the Block.
That was the 90s,
yeah,
right? That was a 90s thing. It wasn't an 80s thing.
No, it was 80.
It started in 87.
Yeah, and ended about 95.
Really,
I mean, we had Tiffany, and it started as a tour. They were the opening act for Tiffany.
Right.
And then they became bigger than Tiffany, and Tiffany became their opening act.
Right.
And then came Marky Mark, and then came a variety of pop artists. Danny, I can't recall, another kid on the tour. We had from that came another group of white kids that we had. And
then when was like the Stevie J? Because I remember you were always wanted me to book freestyle, and I was always like,
Stevie B.
I cannot book this stuff. I just couldn't do it. The clubs, the scene, I was like, I came here to book some hip hop, man.
It's funny, Sal Apatow.
You remember we had that whole roster of it was a whole. We had Melinda. Who was? It was a ton of them.
There was a ton of them, and what's interesting,
and they all worked.
They still work today.
Yeah, they still work today.
They still work today. New York had a company called Fania Records, which was the Fania All Stars, salsa merengue, and traditional Spanish music. It wasn't Mexican music. It wasn't Brazilian music. It was the Central American music and island influence. And today, most of those artists are dead, but they work for 50 years. Mm-hmm. This freestyle stuff still works. All those artists, I'm trying to think, Bob Curry, the managers of some of these things, and Sal Abatella with the Cover Girls, and this, that, and the other one, and they still work today.
And Sal Abatella was the Fever, so you had to be booking the Fever, no?
Oh, we booked all the things at the Fever, yeah.
Right.
And now Sal is all their managers and the booking agent for all the Latin music that was big in the 90s.
Yep, so then the 90s led to that whole thing, and it was kind of like a house music era. Dancey house. It was more of a dance. That's when Hot 97 New York was playing freestyle, right?
Yes.
It wasn't a hip hop station yet.
No.
It was a freestyle station.
Yeah, and it was very big, and still, it's not big, but they still work. They still have big parties with them.
And then you had Big E, and I remember, well, D used to, that's where I get my, D would tell me that he was booking Big E 2 or 3 times a night. He'd book them in an early show, another show, and a later show. Like
that was clubs in Brooklyn.
Clubs, yeah, all over. Yeah, we do like a Manhattan show, a Queens show, and I was like, wow. And that was it's just kind of crazy. So you had Biggie during his rise, and then that led to a whole nother era of rap. I mean, that led to that was the rap going platinum era.
Rap had gone platinum long before that. Rap was always big. It was never little. It was always cultural. It said things to people that resonated with the kids, and it still does. And then came '93, and I retired. I mean, 2003.
2003.
2003, 35 years.
Well, you met me at 97.
Yeah.
You got to do a quick 97 update. So 97, you hire me. Eric Wilson hires me. I start. We move from 1700 Broadway to 250 West 57.
Yeah, we spent about 6 years there.
And then
7 years.
That was that was a very big era still, though, because Hard Knock Life, we had the relationship with Jay-Z. You made the call to Leor and Damon and brought that in. And that
and then we had Redman and Method Man and DMX.
That was a pivotal...
huge tour.
For Def Jam period and hip-hop period, because I believe it was, at that era, the largest grossing hip-hop tour in a long time. I don't know how long.
Ever. Today, we still hold the record for the Charlotte Coliseum as having sold the most tickets for a musical show. Today, the country bands haven't beat us. Nobody beat us.
So you had Jay-Z, Redman, Method Man, DMX, Ja Rule,
That's
and
it.
God knows who else. Some other
there were always
things.
people coming in and out, but those were the four headliners.
That was a massive tour.
Massive tour. Sold out every date on the tour. I don't know, 70 or 80 dates there.
And then, so we had that. We did all those. We did all the. Well, prior to that, when my first week at Famous, it was you guys were already booking Rage Against the Machine, Wu-Tang. Mm-hmm. So that was my first week in the Nassau Coliseum show, and that was a very big moment.
Huge
for rock and rap. I mean, that was huge.
Well, I think it was huge. Rock was going downhill and rap was going up.
And that was an interesting combination. Do you recall any of that, how Rage and Wu-Tang teamed up? Do you recall any of how that tour came about?
It had to be Rage liked Wu-Tang. And listen, let's face it, Wu-Tang was filled with a bunch of characters. I mean, this was a talented group. These kids were great writers.
Mook.
They were tough guys. They were crazy guys. They were everything. They were like the Gap Band. They were the Gap Band of rap.
Yeah. Were they really? Because I didn't know that.
Oh, the Gap Band was crazy.
Was it? Yeah.
Oh, these guys, Charlie Wilson and his brothers were out of their mind.
So the Wu-Tang era was huge, and then all of that split off into its own little things. And then we had Eminem, some of his first shows, and then you walked in one day and you gave me Destiny's Child. And you were in the studio with Vincent Herbert.
Yes, who produced the record.
When they made the big first hit, right?
Yeah, he made No. It was the first hit.
Were you managing Vincent Herbert at that time?
Yeah, I took care of Vincent Herbert and Hex Hector and Peter, Jonathan
Nevins.
No, the writer producer Jonathan Peters.
Yes,
Jonathan Peters, and a variety of others. The Berman Brothers. Yeah,
you were way ahead on that entire. I mean, look at EDM. That was pre-EDM.
It was pre-EDM.
All that was laid the foundation. All those remixes. You were doing all those Whitney Houston, Hex Hector. I mean, how many Hex Hector pop hits?
Actually, it was Jonathan Peters did Whitney Houston, Hex Hector did Janet Jackson, and Hex did everybody, and so did Jonathan.
Everybody.
We did everybody. We remixed everybody's record, and they had a feel.
You and Vicky, right?
For the dance music. I mean, Jonathan and Hex were DJs like you were, but they understood the gay crowd, they understood the straight crowd, and they could somehow tone it down. A lot of the black music, again, was too intense for white people, and they made it acceptable to lots of people. I mean, I remember, I'm trying to think of anyhow, they knew how to tone things and make it acceptable to mass audiences.
Did you ever go to Paradise Garage or any?
Many times. I know Larry Levin, I knew all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of the bands that we had played there.
They all played there.
Yeah. All the disco bands for sure.
Gotcha. And then what was kind of the post, the outro of Famous? Like I went on to do my Milkcrate thing, and you still went for a while.
Famous could have gone as long as I wanted to go. I just had enough.
Yeah.
No desire. I mean, I started 17, I'm now 54, 53, and I'm ready to do something else. And I did.
And that was definitely, I remember that was, when I left, it was definitely the dot-com boom.
Yeah, it was the dot-com boom.
Which had to be 2000.
Yes, exactly right.
And that was, and here we are again in the next era of AI, dot-com craze, right? With the stock market and AI, everything AI related and everything Tesla related. We're at another era similar to...
Not really.
No?
If you look at the dot-com and you look at AI, NVIDIA really makes money.
Yeah.
And these AI stocks and Microsoft and the top 7 make fortunes.
Yeah.
The dot-com boom, nobody was making any money.
Yeah, they hadn't figured
It was
it out.
a dot-com bust.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
These
is
are
real. This
the
is the
powerhouses,
future,
of the world. It's all they're all making lots of money.
And you've been a successful guy in my eyes your whole life. It seems like you just whatever you want to do, you're going to be successful at. Times have changed, the world has changed, but work ethic hasn't. Any advice you would have for anyone wanting to get into music, anyone wanting to get into business? Has anything changed, or is it the same as when you were coming up?
I think it's exactly the
Cooper
same.
Union.
Because when I left the music business, I went into the real estate business in Portland, Maine. A very difficult town to make money in. But it's a poor town, a poor state. I had spent my life representing poor people. Black artists weren't rich people. They came out of poor environments. They struggled. The kids worked hard. They wrote hard. The difference between I found a lot of white kids and a lot of black kids was the black kids wanted to make money. They wanted to make people dance. They wanted to say things and get paid for it. And there wasn't art. It was commerce. And the music business is commerce. I mean, if you recall the early days of the record business, all those companies, EMI, RCA, Polygram, they were industrial companies. They manufactured and distributed records and CDs. The software, which was the music, was just part of it, but they were manufacturers. The black kids wanted to make money and sell stuff. Sometimes the white kids wanted to make art. That was the difference. So I went into the real estate business. I didn't find it any different than the rap business. If you built a building, you had to start with the base, the foundation, and you build from there. Aaron, you've got basically my whole working story in the music business. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here with you. And
we're going to be part 2 at the Hip Hop Museum when we do the exhibit.
I'd love to.
Yeah.